Conker's Bad Fur Day, an iconic platformer by the iconic Rareware, a company that was simply on top of the world during the 90s and very early 2000s, putting out the likes of Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong Country, Perfect Dark, and more to boot. They had a lot of great things going for them during this period, and although Rare's Duolingo streak of putting out new titles that are on par with the likes of Banjo-Kazooie would unfortunately come to a halt after they were acquired by Microsoft, the legacy that they left behind with some of these titles is impossible to understate. And going back to Conker's Bad Fur Day, it is arguably their last iconic and memorable title that they released before joining the dark side. There's a lot to love about this game. A great sense of humor, memorable characters, an amazing soundtrack. It is full of personality, with some of the most bizarre and obscene scenes that would likely never see the light of day if it was released today. I think one of my favorite things about this game is the fact that at face value, it looks like your typical friendly kids cartoon, like, check out this cute squirrel with that big chubby smile, and then, this cute squirrel enters a nightclub, gets really drunk, and starts pissing on some boulders, which is then followed by a scene where Don Weasel, a weasel mafia boss, beats one of his lackeys to death with a bat for disrespecting him.
You don't you ever do that again to me!
Honestly, I would really love to know how many parents out there got this game for their kids when it first released, thinking it was like your typical innocent friendly Mario type game, without taking a proper look at the cover, and then walked into their kid playing this.
There you go, she's all yours.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm going in. Wish me luck, fella. Cheers, little fella. I feel like a new man.
Wow, this game. I think Conker said it best.
Now this is what I call a platform game.
Now that's not to say that the game is flawless. Oh no. It does have its rough spots and areas that just have not aged well at all. Like the stupid clunky inverted aiming controls, the awkward camera that simply doesn't want to be your friend a lot of the time, monotonous back and forth segments like with the cheese, the cogs, and the horrible fucking bat section that controls like a god awful water section that also controls like, and we all know how much everyone loves water levels. And fuck these stupid metal fans. This game's fall damage is also ridiculously unforgiving. Conker can't fall 2 inches it seems without getting hurt. Like, what the hell is this? And of course, it's war. Fuck me, most of this chapter just straight up sucks. And there's absolutely no movie reference that can save the pain of having to get off of this fucking island without dying 100 million times because of the stupid, slow and unreliable aiming controls. God, I swear you need some sort of divine intervention to help you get through this section because this is just laughable.
What's a terrible thing, you know?
It definitely has a lot of things that are just simply really dated today. But it still has a pretty big cult following, and it's still worth playing in my opinion, even if it's just to say that you played it. It's a shame that the sequel ended up getting scrapped because, well, thanks Microsoft. Instead, we got Conker Live and Reloaded, a remake of the original N64 release. And so, which one is the real deal? Which version of the game is better? Although at their core they are both essentially the same game with the same story and everything, they do however have a number of things that make them stand out from each other. I suppose the most obvious difference is the graphics. Whether you prefer the original or Live and Reloaded, I think the overall improvement in the quality and realism of the graphics from the former to the latter are actually really impressive considering that there's only a 4-year difference between them, and yet, the remake somehow looks like an early Xbox 360 game. With that said though, I think they both have their own merits. The original is more cartoony, which as a result feels more genuine and in line with the overall theme, a mature game for adults that's supposed to look like a kid's game parodying the likes of Banjo-Kazooie, and the remake has a lot more fur. A lot more fur. I've heard that the remake's graphics are actually a turner for a lot of people, but I personally don't mind it. I think both look great. With the actual gameplay itself, however, there are some notable differences that for the most part results in Conker Live and Reloaded being the superior version of the game to me. That's right, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. I know that a lot of people hate on the remake, and while there are aspects of the original that I prefer, which I will get to, the remake is an overall improvement. And well, where do I begin? I guess I'll start off by saying that the camera has noticeably improved in the remake. In the original, I found that a lot of the time, the camera was just simply not being very helpful at all, especially in the latter half of the game. But in the remake, I didn't have any issues with it. Also in the original, if you're not sure what you're doing, which is pretty likely on a first playthrough, it can be pretty easy to miss some cash here and there, leading to some confusion. But in the remake, it actually shows you the cash you have and the cash you've missed in the area that you're currently in. I don't have to worry about whether or not I've gotten all the money that I need, because I can quickly press pause and check, and that's a small detail I appreciate. Moving on to bigger details, I think the most important thing that the remake has over the original is the aiming controls. Let's see now, inverted aiming, no thanks, no crosshair until you get the shotgun, and even then it's still janky as shit, no thanks, awkward tank controls, no thanks, and Conker stops on a dime to reload, leaving you wide open to get screwed over by enemies that move too quickly for you to even get a good shot. No fucking thanks. Seriously, maybe I'm just too used to games that have a different control scheme when it comes to aiming and shooting, but I simply cannot adjust to these weird and awkward tank movements and aiming controls. It's too clunky, and it feels so awkward. If you're gonna introduce other gameplay elements into a game, then you should at least try and make it consistent with other aspects of the game that work well. What I see here though, is me hoping to get through these parts of the game as quickly as possible, so that I can finally get to my favourite mission in the game, and it's mainly because of its reference to the Matrix. With the remake though, oh man, it is much, much better here. There are a lot more enemies than in the original, but that's a non-issue because aiming, shooting and moving feels much smoother. It doesn't have the weird tank controls, Conker doesn't stop on a dime to reload, you can now jump and move around freely, and it feels more consistent with the rest of the game. Thank God that this section of the war, and the war in general, is nowhere near as frustrating as it is in the original. It's actually a lot more fun. And it's mostly because aiming and shooting does not feel like a chore anymore. Now you might be thinking, if the remake really does improve upon the original that much, then why do so many people bash on it? And is there really any reason to go back to the original anymore? Well, although I think the remake is vastly superior due to the better controls, it does have some things that simply don't feel the same as they do in the original. The most notable thing I would say is the fact that the remake is a lot more censored than the original, which is extremely ironic considering this is Nintendo we're talking about here. Just imagine, the same game on the Xbox being the more censored version than its Nintendo release. That just sounds like a freaky fever dream to me. Although both versions of the game are partially censored, the remake takes it to another level. And this is probably why so many people bash on the remake, considering the original plan during development was apparently to release the game completely uncensored. It was even originally titled Conker Live and Uncut rather than Reloaded. So I'm sure a lot of people got extremely disappointed to say the least when they found out that just simply wasn't the case. And to be honest, it is really hard not to notice and be like, ah man, this just doesn't feel the same anymore, with the Great Mighty Pooh being the main thing that springs to mind. This boss fight just simply isn't the same in the remake. The reverb and the fact that it's censored really brings it down a notch. Just take a listen.
I am the great mighty Pooh, and I am going to throw my at you. A huge supply of teach comes from my chocolate starfish. How about some scat, you little
But then there's the original.
I I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my shit at you. A huge supply of tish comes from my chocolate starfish. How about some scat, you little twat?
It really is like night and day here. The characters in the original are also much more expressive, which is pretty ironic considering the remake is supposed to be the graphically superior version of the game, and while it technically is, it still falls flat when comparing how a lot of the characters express themselves. Like, Conker doesn't even have bloodshot eyes when he wakes up with a hangover in this scene in the remake.
Oh no. It's gonna be one of those days.
There were also a few times in the remake where Conker would just decide to do this.
Oh no. Hello, programmer. Ah, thank God.
It's a weird glitch, but to be honest, it didn't really have any negative impact on the overall game, but I still thought it was worth mentioning. To keep it 100 though, these are pretty much the only things about the original that I prefer over the remake. The remake not only improved upon things about the original that either sucked or didn't age well, but it also expanded on the overall by adding these goblin dudes and letting Conker go to town on them with a bat, which filled in some gaps with some of the emptiness in the overworld. And that's another thing. In the original, you had to press B for Conker to stop on a dime to hit something with the frying pan, which was a little annoying with the cogs because of how fast they moved, but in the remake, again, it feels much smoother and a lot more fluid, just like with the aiming controls, and even adds this new 3-hit combo which, although it is a relatively small detail, it's still details like this that nonetheless make the game feel more cohesive overall. Other small details that the remake either removed or altered from the original game in minor ways include the location of one of the bees in the barn as well as the cogs in Bat's tower, the removal of that stupid eel at the beginning of the war and replacing it with a switch, this giant turret which no longer has a teddy on it waiting for you when you enter this room, and the next room which has this mutant teddy jump out of this liquid containment thing, serving as a sort of mini boss fight. There are probably other numerous smaller details, like Conker only holding one gun in the remake rather than two that I'm missing, but that's just it. They're details that otherwise have little to no impact on the game as a whole, and how it compares to the original.
Hello? What's going on? Is this a joke?
And so I've established that the remake is ultimately the superior version of the game for me. However, it still does retain a few things from the original that are still pretty bad in my opinion, with swimming underwater being the first thing that springs to mind. Conker can hold his breath for longer now, which is great and all, but in terms of its controls, unlike aiming and shooting, I wouldn't say it's an overall improvement. This underwater section still sucks, and these metal fans can suck Conker's green metal pipe. Also, this racing segment, although I love the music, it's not exactly what I would call a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater in either the original or the remake. Fuck this dinosaur, it is the bane of my existence in this segment with how random it is. And you know what else is the bane of my existence? The bat section. God, it's still just as awkward and just as boring in the remake. You fly, crap on someone, bring them back to your distant vampire relative or whatever he is, and repeat. It's just not fun. Well, now I guess the main other thing to mention is the multiplayer and Xbox Live, which no longer works. I can't lie, I didn't grow up playing this game back when the OG Xbox servers were still online. In fact, I was still just a tiny baby back when the PS5 was released, so I can't judge it personally. As for the multiplayer, I've heard a lot of people actually love the original game's multiplayer a lot, which honestly kinda surprised me. Here you have 7 different mini-games, each with their own unique set of rules and everything, but the remake unfortunately removed most of them and basically just watered it down to a standard squirrels vs teddies deathmatch or capture the flag. I'm not gonna lie though, Conker's Bad Fur Day isn't really the type of game that I play for multiplayer. I did try playing what both versions had to offer, and you know, more power to anyone out there who does enjoy it. But I eventually came to the conclusion that I'm simply not that interested in this. That's just me though.
Man, this is some bullshit!
And well, that's basically the gist of it. With all of that said and done, I think I made it pretty clear which version of the game I personally prefer. I know a lot of people favor the original N64 version because they prefer the graphics, the multiplayer, and the fact that it's the less censored version of the game, which, yeah, the censorship does suck and it is annoying, but if I had to choose between fun gameplay with no words being censored, or poor gameplay but the no words not being censored, I think I'd swallow my pride and pick the version of the game I know I'd have more fun playing. So yeah, that's Conker's Bad Fur Day for ya. Let me know what you think. Ciao.